And while all of this goes on, preparations are underway for Thursday. Come Thursday, Narendra Modi will be sworn in as India's Prime Minister for a second successive time. The President will administer the oath to Mr. Modi and his Council of Ministers. And in attendance will be important figures in India's neighborhood. The guest list includes the leaders of the BIMSTEC nations, the Kyrgyz Republic and Mauritius. Each of them is key to India leveraging its position in this region. BIMSTEC stands for the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, but it means much more. The group comprises Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Nepal, Bhutan and India. Geographically speaking, it bridges South and Southeast Asia. Economically, it is home to a combined GDP of $2.7 trillion. For India, BIMSTEC's importance became evident in the aftermath of the Uri attack, when a number of BIMSTEC nations backed India's call for boycotting the SAARC summit in Islamabad. Hosting the 2016 BRICS summit later that year, India held an outreach summit for BIMSTEC members. Its importance as an offset to the SAARC had become evident. BIMSTEC is SAARC minus Pakistan and Afghanistan. Islamabad's absence is a plus. It allows India to work without the distraction of Pakistan's persistent naysaying. Now, it's no secret that Beijing is sponsoring infrastructure development in almost all the BIMSTEC countries. So as a member of this bloc, India can pursue its neighborhood first policy, its Act East policy, without the spectre of China hanging overhead. The push for people-to-people contact and trade is key to this end. Likewise, the invitation to Mr. Modi's swearing-in ceremony to the Kyrgyz president is also significant. This country, the Kyrgyz president, in fact, is the current chair of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or the SCO. It's an important platform which also includes India, China, Russia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan and Pakistan. The bloc allows India to push forward with its strategic policy objectives of connectivity and counter-terrorism. Inviting the Prime Minister of Mauritius is also important, as a person of Indian origin, Pravin Jugnauth, and his name carries weight in the Indian diaspora. A community that Mr. Modi has been careful to reach out to in his first term. He's cultivated this community, a trend that is likely to continue as India's overseas populations grow further in the years to come. So this is what the guest list will look like. Let's talk about the guests we have on the panel today. Gurjit Singh, India's former ambassador to Germany, and someone who's also been India's ambassador to ASEAN, correct me if I'm wrong. Pant, distinguished fellow and head of the ORF Strategic Affairs Studies Program. Good evening and thank you both for joining us here. Ambassador Singh, if I could begin with you, there's been much speculation on the list, and some reports mentioned Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump as invitees. Would you say that the focus on BIMSTEC is a wiser decision?
I think it is an extremely wise and well thought out decision because, as you said earlier, it bridges the Act East policy with our neighborhood first policy and brings in a clutch of really friendly countries who don't have any controversy among them. So I think this was a very safe step, putting neighborhood first, putting our close friends in ASEAN like Myanmar and Thailand, with whom we have important projects together, and putting perhaps a new whiff of life into BIMSTEC like we did in 2016. So my compliments to the government on thinking this out.
Right. Pant, BIMSTEC has often been called a rebound relationship for India. When things don't work out in SAARC, we turn to BIMSTEC. Do you think by inviting BIMSTEC leaders for the swearing-in ceremony, this government is trying to change that and putting the primary focus on this group now?
I think this invitation underscores a trend that we have seen over the last few years, especially under this government. And there's been a sense that BIMSTEC as a platform needs to be reinvigorated. And I think that's what has been a sustained message from the Prime Minister and from the External Affairs Minister. And I think that is what we are now seeing in terms of the outreach that the Prime Minister's swearing-in ceremony ostensibly is trying to communicate. And I think if you look at the trend over the last 4 to 5 years, there has been this argument that, you know, after the initial impetus towards SAARC and Pakistan, when it did not work out, then I think India's foreign policy has moved significantly in terms of redefining its engagement in the neighborhood by looking at the Bay of Bengal community as one where perhaps India's leadership in the region can be projected. And I think the fact that it bridges and it brings in SAARC plus countries, the Southeast Asian countries, I think is something that one has to look at in the larger matrix of Indian foreign policy, where India is looking east, India is looking more proactively towards engaging that part of the region, not only to shore up its leadership credentials, but also to make a larger point that with Pakistan, perhaps regional integration may not go very far, but without Pakistan, we can bring these countries into a larger framework of cohesive regional leadership.
Right. Ambassador Singh, is this also a fundamental shift in how we approach the world around us? That the government of India has decided that we will not expend our energies on dealing with Pakistan. We will work elsewhere to ensure that those groups and those relationships are so strong that whatever problems we have with Pakistan can be taken care of.
I think we are putting too much emphasis on Pakistan. I would like to see this as a positive step, that we have tried to reach out to our neighbors in a different sense. And here we have Thailand and Myanmar. And don't forget, Thailand is the chair of ASEAN for this year. And Prime Minister will be traveling to Thailand in November for the India, ASEAN and the EAS summit. It's a very important country. Now, when you look at the structure of BIMSTEC, you suddenly find you have a group of 7 rather friendly countries with no controversy among them. Last time, it was in 2014, a step with great confidence where we brought in SARC and the Pakistan came along. But I think that Vishwas is not there this time, that we are going to get the kind of reaction we want. So I think it is simply, I don't think Pakistan is going to be left out of Indian foreign policy. It's just that Pakistan is left out of the inauguration.
And it may not be the top priority, but BIMSTEC has been around for a while, 1997, more than 2 decades. So it's taken a while for the government of India to realize its full potential, to try to, because as we said, in 2016, after the Uri attacks, when India turned to BIMSTEC, that was perhaps the most visible engagement and the highest level of engagement that we saw. And from then on, this has continued. So is this another step in trying to isolate Pakistan again, the Pakistan word invariably
I think it's an attempt to look at India's neighborhood differently. It's an attempt to look at India's regional leadership differently, because a lot of the time when you bring Pakistan into the conversation gets stuck. So we are not able to move forward in that conversation.
Right.
And I think now that we have taken this leap, and as you rightly point out, BIMSTEC has been there for the last few years, for the last 2 decades, in fact, and only now that we are witnessing a sort of rejuvenation of this platform, perhaps for the better, perhaps for a reimagination of India's neighborhood, which extends all the way to East and Southeast Asia, which I think is a larger point that Indian foreign policy should be making at this juncture when you want to expand your global footprint.
So, all right, we'll not mention Pakistan. You said no controversy in the member countries, and yet there is China. And China has invested in all these countries, and India and China are vying for space, for turf in this region. Do you believe that BIMSTEC can achieve what SARC couldn't?
Certainly, I think much more. Because with them, we don't have anybody holding up free trade negotiations, for instance. It's just that we have been going slow in a structured manner. But if you see India's individual relations with all the countries of BIMSTEC, they are far, far ahead of, let's say, what we have done with Pakistan, for instance, or what we're allowed to do. So I think bilaterally, with all these countries, we have much going. And with Myanmar and Thailand, we actually have the trilateral highway, which is the centerpiece of our relationship with ASEAN. And a big infrastructure project. With Myanmar, we also have the Kaladan multimodal port coming up.
Right.
And we have several projects. So I think India.
So do the Chinese.
So do the Chinese. So I do not again see this as competitive. I see, and I would agree with Mr. Pant, I think this is a redefining of our interest in our neighborhood and trying to do more. Now, question is how structured will it become after this one?
Right. Can BIMSTEC prove to be an effective counterbalance to China's aggression and presence in the region?
I think there is a lot of potential here, which, as we were discussing in the previous question, we have not been able to tap into. Now, with the energy that New Delhi seems to be putting into this enterprise, perhaps, there is a possibility that some of the issues that were pulling this enterprise behind might now become more feasible for us to overcome. But I think, China question is overrated in some ways, because this is a neighborhood that is brimming with opportunities, and opportunities not simply for China, but also for India. So as I think was pointed out, the kind of connectivity projects that India has envisaged for this region are not the possibilities that China has put into. So in some ways, there is an organic link that binds India to Myanmar and Thailand, and that is, the fact that Northeast connects India to these countries and all the way to Southeast Asia. That's a paradigm shift in the way we look at our eastern neighborhood. And if we can, even deliver half of what we are now, thinking about, I think that would be a great success, both in terms of our connecting to a part of the region with which we have had historical civilizational contacts, but also in terms of how we can match up to some of the aspirations that Chinese may or may not have in the region.
We often talk about the civilizational contacts and people-to-people contact and the traditional relationship, but we've seen in country after country that when you spend top dollars, and when all these countries come on board, for instance, on a BRI project and things like that, then it's not black and white anymore. While India may be doing what it's doing and it's great, India is a little late to the party, would you say?
Well, I don't think you're ever late to any party in international relations. I think here the issue is that in this Bay of Bengal community, there is a huge cultural comfort which we enjoy. And I think that is not so for China that much. China has a more economic comfort. And these countries today do not want to put all their eggs in the Chinese basket, politically, economically, metaphorically, in every way. So I think all of them look for a little more India in all their activity, and if India is stepping forward, they will all welcome it. I know there is BRI and there's China, but that is not stopping India. For instance, you can say in the last week, I have heard that there is an Indian port project coming up in Myanmar,
Colombo.
and now one with the Japanese in Colombo. So it's not that India is sitting back and doing nothing. We are organizing ourselves differently, trying to move in our own way forward, and all those people are actually quite comfortable. They would like more to happen, but India, they often say, China may do more, but India does better. So I think we need to build on that.
Right. And I want to repeat the figures that we just mentioned. There's a lot of economic potential in this grouping. 7 countries, more than 1/5 of the world population, 22% of the world's population resides here. Combined GDP of close to $3 trillion and economic growth rates anywhere between 3.5% to 7.5%. Also vast natural resources. What kind of economic potential should India look at exploiting?
I think one of the things that perhaps will be at the forefront of this engagement, and if you look at the last statement that came out of the BIMSTEC summit, maritime space, the blue economy was one of the areas which needs to be exploited. After all, it is the Bay of Bengal community we are talking about. And I think there some tentative steps were taken last time when the BIMSTEC summit took place. And I think that's an area where a strong push can be made, because if you reimagine the maritime space as one where you're looking at both traditional and non-traditional security issues, you also can look at people-to-people contacts in very different ways. You can look at issues like economic rejuvenation of fisheries, maritime ports, etc., in ways that I think would sort of redefine the economic architecture of the region. So you have countries like Thailand, Myanmar, Bangladesh, all of them can be integrated into something which, the sum of the whole would be very, very significant.
Right.
And I think that is something where enough efforts needs to be put in. And I think that's where the energies in the past, if the direction is there, what we had seen for the past few summits, that's where the direction seems to be moving at the moment. But I think the agenda is big, but agenda is ambitious. And I think it should be ambitious given that the baseline was so low. Yes. As we said, we started 2 decades back, and yet it's only now that we recognize the importance of BIMSTEC in how India reimagines itself in the neighborhood.
Right, and not just the Bay of Bengal, the larger Indian Ocean region, the fact that the leader of Mauritius has been invited, it has to be more than just the Indian diaspora. The fact that Mauritius is also a key factor in India's strategic policy in this region.
I agree. And I think you mentioned Indian Ocean, which is a good thing, because the Bay of Bengal community is actually firmly part of our Act East policy, the Indo-Pacific issues, and our Indian Ocean Connect. Now, if you look at the way India, Australia, and Indonesia revived IORA, which was a dormant organization, I would think that is the model. Small secretariat, led by the chairman, don't do too many summits, focus on ministerial and official level and practical work. I think that is the way BIMSTEC needs to go. We don't need to reinvent ASEAN. After all, we are not going to make so much headway on BIMSTEC, a free trade area, till we get RCEP sorted out. So I think we need to put a few things on the table, marshal the bilaterals that we have very strongly with this, and see what we can do better using those. We have 14 groups right now of BIMSTEC.
Yes.
I think that's far too much.
Yes.
We should not load BIMSTEC so much. I will go back to the IORA example. When India took the chair of IORA in 2012, we said small secretariat, ministerial-led, not summit-led, and let's get 3 countries or 4 countries to take leads in different places. But yes, India being the biggest country over here, I think we need to play a bigger role.
Right.
So let's take up, I think India chairs 4 groups. Let's see what we can do with them better ahead.
Right, 14 groups of BIMSTEC. I can tell you, you've been a diplomat and you deal with diplomats and you know how these things work. But from the perspective of an outsider, we have way too many summits, way too many such groupings, and a lot of bureaucracy around it. But there is no clarity on what is done. So do you think that in the past few years and the years that will follow, we are going to see more evidence of not just look east but act east?
I think so. I think a lot of developments have happened in the last few years in terms of how we have articulated and how we have operationalized our Act East policy. And I think that's why the Prime Minister wanted to shift from look east to act east, because he thought that it looks more dynamic. If you say act east, you are forced to operationalize that.
What I'm trying to ask is, it's not just a catchphrase. We are actually acting.
If you look at the demand from the bottom up in the region and how the expectations about India have risen, I think it's a significant indicator of how much the region wants from India, and I think also in some ways what India is capable of delivering on the ground. I think the ambassador was earlier mentioning that there is a difference between China and India. China, yes, China delivers a lot, and China delivers some very good quality infrastructure, for example. But I think the difference is that China's demands are often top down. So I think here India has tried to be more participatory in its approach, and that has its benefits in some segments, not in all segments. But I think with the BIMSTEC in particular, unless India takes the lead and shows that it is able to deliver on certain key fronts, I'm afraid we'll go back to a situation where we had BIMSTEC for the last 2 decades and no one had heard about it. But now that we have political push from New Delhi, I think there is more hope about BIMSTEC's ability to deliver.
Right, you use the word participatory.
Yes.
As we come to final comments, I also want to ask you, do you believe that over the past few years, India's image has also changed from trying to play big brother to trying to be a part of an effort, a joint effort or a partnership?
I think very much so. But you know, frankly, people want you as a partner provided you have the strength of a big brother. Today the world is very transactional. We have cultural comfort, but unless you can keep pouring in money or into funds into doing things, you know, you are as good as your last project. Nobody looks back 30 years ago, how many dams you built. They only want to know what are you doing now.
Which is what I said, traditional
Yes. So
and people-to-people contacts is
True.
fine, but what are you giving on the table now?
I think we need to work with BIMSTEC on things like disaster management, on maritime issues which bring us all together, on coastal works, you know, all kinds of coastal issues are there, including the environment. Plus, I think we need to have one lighthouse project, which like for ASEAN, we have the trilateral highway which goes. Now, what can we do with that kind of a project for this region? What connectivity can we bring? It is digital, physical, what? So I think some connectivity project to give BIMSTEC a reality beyond the political one, I think will be very important.
Closing comments. What is it that India should look at exploring from this?
I would agree. I think connectivity is something that all countries are looking at. So the China factor comes into play, and now that there are multiple aspects and multiple projects being initiated on connectivity, I think it would be important for India to make a case that India remains a relevant player in this game. So we are now doing a lot with third parties, with the trilateral engagement that we have with Japan, for example, on a number of countries. And I think that perhaps is a way to go about. Given that you want to raise confidence in these countries, that India not only is capable of reimagining its neighborhood, but also delivering on the ground. And I think that's the possibility we need to create in the region, perhaps for the long-term sustenance of this project.
Right. Thank you both, Ambassador Singh and Harshvi Pant, for joining us here. BIMSTEC leaders will be part of Prime Minister Modi's second swearing-in ceremony as he takes oath of office on Thursday. Of course, we'll be bringing you a special broadcast around that. Thanks very much for watching.